Let's welcome Steve and Chen.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to run through a few slides, but actually one thing that I'm really hoping to do is a bunch of Q&A at the end of the session to really hear feedback directly from everyone here. So definitely think of the questions you want to ask about GMB after I get through some of these slides. So I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the state of local search, hopefully not steal all of Greg's thunder. Then talk a little bit about Google My Business, and then, again, Q&A. So I'm sure, as everybody is aware, Google's getting millions of users searching for local businesses every day, and I don't think that would surprise anybody. But to kind of get down into the details of that a little bit, so we're seeing billions of local searches each month, and actually we're seeing about 30% of mobile searches are related to location. So 30% of the mobile searches we get have some element of location, somebody asking about a business. And that's actually growing very, very quickly. It's growing at a 50% year-over-year rate, which is actually significantly faster than even the overall mobile search growth rate. And from these queries, we're delivering hundreds of millions of phone calls and billions of directions requests to businesses across the world. And here, I know there's a lot of people attending here who have businesses that have tens, hundreds, even thousands of locations. So specifically on that, we're actually also seeing over 100 million mobile queries per day for what we call chain information. And for us, a chain is any business with more than two or more locations. And so if we see a query like Marriott Hours or Olive Garden Menu or U.S. Bank ATM, for all of those queries, we consider those both chain queries and local queries, and we're getting about 100 million of those a day.
Is that U.S. or global?
That's global. So how can you actually take advantage of this? It's an incredible amount of traffic. It's growing very, very rapidly. And so what I want to talk a little bit about is how do we use Google My Business to actually take advantage of all of this traffic that's coming through. So I think a lot of you are already familiar with Google My Business, but I'm going to get a quick overview for those of you who haven't started using it. But it's basically a product that allows you to take your business and make sure that it's present on maps and local search and to promote your actual brand. So you use this tool to surface your locations, to give customers information about your business. So when they're at that point where they're making a decision about whether to visit your store, whether to make a purchase, you want to make sure the information you have on your business listing makes them make that decision. And then as you use the tool, there's actually more and more insights that we're building into GMB so that you can go back and look at what are people actually doing on my listings on maps and on local search. And so specifically for this audience, since there are many people here who have many, many locations, I want to talk a little bit about how to make sure you get all your locations in front of our users. So as I mentioned, we're getting about 100 million daily chain searches. And so when a user searches for a chain, so when they search for Macy's near me, et cetera, we try to surface the 3 closest locations to that user. And so there's many things that go into deciding like which locations belong to which chain. We're doing things like crawling people's websites. We have people actually physically, operators actually manually calling stores to validate whether or not these stores exist. So there's a whole bunch of different inputs, user inputs. But actually one of the most important ones is your own Google My Business account. So if your account does not contain your listings, it makes it much, much harder for us to know that, for example, there's we were just talking to Jimmy John's. There's, I think, about like 2,800 Jimmy John locations. That's a ton. And so it's quite easy for us to miss, 100 of those. So you may search for Jimmy John's near me, and the one that's right down the street doesn't come up, but the one that's, 2 miles away comes up because their account is not complete. So definitely one recommendation I have is make sure you're periodically going into your account or working with your partner to go into your account to make sure that you are claiming all the locations for your brand. And so, of course, it's not enough just to be present on search. When someone lands on your listing or sees you in local search, you really, really want to stand out. So some of the information, some of the surveys we've run have demonstrated that when people come and see your business, they're not really just looking for your address. So, for example, 30% of the people we surveyed are actually also looking for your business hours, and over a quarter of them are looking for reviews about your business. In addition, they're really looking to connect with you. So almost 70% of consumers that we surveyed said that when they're on their phone and they're looking at a business listing, one of the next things they want to do is to actually call that merchant or connect with them in some other way to actually communicate with them directly. And so of course, this is an obvious segue. Again, Google My Business is a way to do this. So you can add context, you can add connections to your Google My Business listing so that you can make these types of connections. And I would say this is actually one of the biggest evolutions of GMB. For years, GMB was mostly about a one-way pipe from you to us. How do we get your hours? How do we get your addresses? How do we get your phone numbers? And over the last couple of years, we started to build to say, actually, so the merchants have done a really good job giving us this information. Now we need to do more to help them. They're seeing millions and millions of people landing on their maps listings, seeing them in local search, but we're not really enabling those users to connect with the business more directly. So we're building many more tools. There's much more of a focus of how do we actually help you connect with your customer that's looking at your maps listing, looking at you in local search. And so there's a bunch of different features that we've built. I'll talk about them a little bit more, but there's some really obvious things, like you really want to make sure that you have good photos on your listings. You really want to make sure that you are looking at your reviews and managing your reviews. There's a lot of different things that customers look at to decide whether or not they can actually connect with this business when they're looking at their listing on maps. So here's another survey we ran where we showed consumers what we're calling an empty listing, so a listing that doesn't have reviews, doesn't have photos, versus a complete listing that has a lot of these features that I've been talking about. And you can see it's pretty astounding consumer reaction to these two different types of listings. So for example, the complete listing is almost 3 times more likely to be considered reputable, almost 4 times as likely to be considered well-liked, and probably most importantly, 1.7 times more likely to be considered for a purchase. So even making sure that your listing has this type of information on there and that you're going in there and making sure that the consumer feels like there's actually a merchant presence on this listing has a huge impact with how people interact with you and your listing. All right, and so what I'm going to do now is just talk a little bit about GMB overall, some of the features we offer, some of the things we've recently launched, and then I'll jump into the Q&A. So over the years, we've launched a pretty wide range of tools to enable you to manage your locations. And so we've broken it up in a couple different buckets. One is tools that enable you to manage your brand. So for example, that's photos. That's the recently launched merchant description that I'll talk about in a little bit. There are ways to connect with your customers. So that's phone calls. That's the recently launched business messaging. Ways to transact. So actually, I was surprised to find that, for example, there's a lot of restaurants that don't have order links or menu links on their listing, which to me seems like a super, super basic thing to do. You have an entire order workflow that you've built out, and if you put that link on your maps listing, when the user lands on it, it's super easy for them to click on it and go right into the order workflow that you've invested in. And then what we're doing more of is also trying to make sure that as you use Google My Business, now you can go in and look at the insights. You can see how many people have looked at you in maps, how many people have looked at you in local search. And for example, recently we launched a feature so you can actually see the queries that people are typing in to then land on your listing. All right, I'm going to highlight a couple different things we've worked on, and then I'll jump into the Q&A. So merchant description, this launched, I think it was just maybe like 3 months ago, and we're seeing really, really enormous uptake of this feature. And the reason we think that is, it's a way for you to tell your customer about yourself in your own words. So we've always historically had that little snippet on top of the listing that is a Google-written piece of content about your business. And we heard a lot of feedback of like, why can't I tell you about my business myself? And so that's the purpose of merchant description. So now you can use text, photos, videos, write a little description about your own business that your customer will see. The other thing we heard of a lot of feedback, I think pretty much, I've been on the team for about 1.5 years, and I think every single call I've been on, I've heard about how slow the UI is. And actually, I remember I had a call with a really large fast food chain, and they insisted on logging in while I was online with them so that I could watch how long it took for the page to actually load, which is kind of embarrassing. It took like 20 minutes for the page to load. So over the last year, we've spent a significant amount of time improving the infrastructure behind Google My Business for large enterprises. And now our benchmarks indicate that it will load in milliseconds, whereas before, sometimes it would take 15, 20, even 30 minutes for that first page to load. And so I think now it's something like 99% of customers have been migrated over. The very largest customers, we're still waiting for the spreadsheet functionality to be migrated over, and once that's done, then we'll move everybody else over. So if you're not over there yet, in the next couple months, you should hopefully start to see your account moved over to this new UI, which will load within less than a second when you log in. And then the last thing we're going to talk about before I open it up for Q&A is business messaging. So we've seen a really huge consumer shift from phone calls to messaging. The anecdote I always give, I have a 15-year-old boy and a 13-year-old boy. And if I ever call them on the phone, they're always like, "Dad, why are you calling me?" Or they, like, for example, they never check their voicemail. So if you leave them a voicemail, it's just like a black hole. So they always want text, and that's kind of the direction that people are moving, even in terms of interacting with businesses. And so last year we launched business messaging, but it was more focused on mom and pops. So if you went to the business listing for a small store, you could click on the message button. That message would go to the phone of the listing owner, which really makes a lot of, if you have one store, two stores, three stores, that actually makes a ton of sense in terms of the experience. But the feedback we got is when we went out and we talked to a couple large hotel chains, and their immediate feedback was like, how does this work? Like, it's going to go to who? Whose phone number do we put in there to get these business messages? And they basically said, we've spent a ton of money building our own customer service organizations, and what we really want is all these messages to come to those customer service reps. And so what we've been building, and we launched a couple months ago, is actually a business messaging API. And so now, partnering with partners, you can actually now integrate with that API so that as messages come in off of your listings, they can be routed to your customer service organization as you want.